"Make me your wife just for tonight," said the widowed woman. So the cowboy gave her a chance. Clayton Ward had lived most of his life believing he understood people. As a cowboy who spent years drifting across ranches and small frontier towns, he had met all sorts of souls, broken, bitter, hopeful, lost. But none had struck him as deeply as the woman he found sitting alone, near the abandoned cabin at the edge of Canyon Ridge. Her name was Lara, a widow, a woman whose silence felt heavier than any grief he had seen before. She kept her head low, her fingers running along the beaded band around her arm as if anchoring herself to something only she could feel. Clayton had come looking for a horse trail, not expecting to stumble on a person. He paused when he saw her, not just because she was beautiful in a way that wasn't loud or showy, but because she looked like someone holding the last threads of her strength together. When she looked up, her eyes carried that mix of guardedness and courage found in those who had suffered deeply but refused to break. She didn't greet him. Instead, she studied him for a long second, as if trying to decide whether he was danger, help, or simply another passing shadow in her already bruised life. Clayton, unsure what to say, simply tipped his hat and asked what any decent man would ask in such a situation, if she was all right. Her answer was a quiet, steady no. There was no trembling in her voice, no attempt at hiding her pain. It was raw, honest, and the kind of truth that forced him to pay attention. She invited him to sit, though the word invited didn't quite fit. It was more like she needed him to, even if she didn't fully understand why. As he settled on a fallen log across from her, she spoke with a kind of heaviness that made every word sound like it, cost her something to voice. She told him about her husband, how he died months ago in an accident that left her alone without family, without protection, without purpose. She told him how her tribal village, once her home, had slowly stopped acknowledging her grief, expecting her to move forward, though her heart had barely begun to heal. Clayton didn't interrupt. He didn't offer empty comforts. He simply listened, and with every moment he listened, Lyra seemed to gather strength. She looked him in the eyes. When she finally said something that made him tense in confusion, "Clayton Ward," she whispered, even though he hadn't told her his name. "I need something from you." He waited. She took a deep breath, locking her gaze onto his in a way that made his heartbeat slow. "Make me your wife," she said, her voice steady, "just for tonight." The request shocked him, not because it was improper or bold, but because of the deep sadness hiding behind it. She wasn't asking for romance. She wasn't asking for possession or passion. She was asking for something far more fragile, belonging. Clayton forced himself to ask her why. Lyra explained in a soft voice that tonight would mark the day her husband had died. She couldn't bear to face it alone, her people believed. That a widow should be guided back into life by someone who honored her pain rather than judged her for still carrying it. But she had no one left who understood her, no one who saw her as more than a broken woman clinging to memories. She needed someone to give her a moment of dignity, a moment of grounding, a moment where she wasn't just a widow trying to survive her loss. Clayton's chest tightened. It wasn't a request a man could accept lightly. She wasn't asking for intimacy. She was asking for a place in someone's world, even if only for a night, a place where she could breathe without mourning. He told her he couldn't pretend to be something he wasn't, that marriage was sacred, not something to be borrowed. But Lyra shook her head gently. "I'm not asking you to love me," she said. "I'm asking you to help me remember that I'm still a woman who deserves a life beyond grief." Her vulnerability was not theatrical. It was quiet, deep, and real. After a long silence, Clayton took off his hat and placed it beside him in the snow. "If it helps you stand again," he murmured, "I'll give you whatever peace I can." Lyra let out a shaky breath that sounded half relief, half fear. She guided him to the cabin, explaining that in her tribe, a symbolic union didn't require vows or rituals. It required presence, respect, and truth. She tied a simple beaded cord around his wrist and one around hers, saying it represented a bond of protection, not ownership. They talked for hours, about her husband, about the life she lost. about the future she was terrified to face. Clayton didn't try to fix her. He didn't tell her to let go or move on. He simply remained with her, fully present, giving her the one thing she had gone without for too long, gentle companionship. As night deepened, Lyra leaned quietly against his shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply allowed herself to rest for the first time in months. Clayton wrapped his coat around her, not as a husband or a lover, but as a man who understood the weight of loneliness. The more he sat there with her, the more he realized her request wasn't strange at all. It was human, and as the night embraced them both, he felt the beginning of something. Something he didn't yet understand but knew was important. A night that changed them both. Clayton expected the morning to bring awkwardness, expected her to pull away or thank him out of obligation, or pretend the night meant nothing. But when Lyra opened her eyes and met his, she didn't look embarrassed or uncertain. She looked steady, like someone who had finally slept without ghosts clawing at her dreams. She sat up slowly, her fingers lightly touching the beaded cord on her wrist. The temporary bond, the quiet symbol of the night she had borrowed. She didn't rush to untie it. Instead, she studied it, almost as if she was surprised by how much strength a simple piece of thread had given her. Clayton didn't speak first. He didn't want to influence whatever she needed to say. Eventually, she whispered, "I thought I would feel weak this morning, but I don't. I feel restored somehow." He nodded. She hesitated before asking if he regretted agreeing to her request. Clayton was a man who rarely used many words, but he made sure the ones he chose mattered. "No," he told her softly. "I'd regret walking away when someone needed me." Lyra's face softened. They spent the morning inside the cabin, not out of necessity, but because neither felt the urge to break the quiet connection that had formed between them. She spoke more freely than she had the night before, not about the depth of her grief, but about the parts of herself she had forgotten, how she used to laugh easily, how she used to carve bead patterns for children, how she dreamed once of having a family of her own. Clayton listened as though every memory she shared was precious. And with every passing moment, Lyra began to shift from a woman defined by loss into a woman rediscovering her own identity. She eventually removed the beaded cord from her wrist and placed it gently in his palm. "Our bond ends here," she said softly. That was the promise. Clayton understood, but what he didn't expect was the sudden ache he felt when the cord left her wrist. It startled him. He had agreed to help her heal, but somewhere, in the quiet hours between night and morning, something began to root itself in him. Not romantic desire, not yet. Something deeper, a need to protect her not as a symbol, but as a choice. Lyra walked outside and he followed. The cabin looked different in daylight, though not because of weather. It looked like a place where two wounded lives had quietly brushed against each other. She turned to him with an expression that was neither sad nor lonely. It was grateful. She told him she was leaving the ridge that day. She needed to return to her people with a steadier heart. She needed to reclaim her life, not drown in the memory of what she had lost. But before she left, she reached up and touched Clayton's cheek with a palm that trembled only slightly. "You showed me I am not broken," she whispered. "I can face tomorrow." Clayton didn't stop her. He didn't ask her to stay. That would have turned her healing into another cage. Instead, he offered her something simple but sincere. "If life ever brings you back my way, you'll find me right here." Lyra nodded. She walked toward the path leading away from the cabin. Her steps steady, grounded, almost reborn. Clayton watched her go, not with longing, but with a quiet pride. Some people come into one's life to stay. Others come to be held just long enough to remember who they are. Lyra was the second kind. But as she reached the curve of the ridge and turned for one last look, their eyes met across the distance. In that single look was a promise. Neither had spoken aloud. A promise that the night they shared wasn't borrowed after all. It was a beginning, a possibility, waiting for its time. Clayton stayed by the cabin long after she vanished from sight, his hand curled around the beaded cord she had returned to him. It felt less like an ending and more like a seed planted quietly inside his heart. And though neither of them said the words, both understood something simple and undeniable. Sometimes a single night, given freely, held gently, can change the course of two lives forever.